for an organization called Center for Student Missions. You guys can all stay up here if you want. It's not going to be long. No, whatever you want to do. It's all right. Hey, there you go. Hey, Center for Student Missions is an organization in downtown Los Angeles. I lived in a Skid Row hotel, and my job was to take a bunch of youth groups that would come to downtown LA once a week, and my job was to take these youth groups and give them an incredible inner-city experience where we'd go into missions, feed homeless, we did a prayer tour around the city, and we did a lot of crazy things. And so one particular weekend, there was a group of college guys that came up that I was in charge of taking around the city and plugging them in to serve different places. And one of them came up late. They had a van, but one of them came up late and had a car, and he parked it next to our Skid Row hotel. And so about 10, 11 o'clock at night, we came back to our Skid Row hotel in the van, and we were walking into the hotel, and one of the guys taps this other guy on the shoulder. He says, "Hey, bro, isn't that your car?" He's like, "Yeah, that's my car." He's like, "Why is somebody else in it?" And we looked over there, and there's a guy that had broken into his car, and he was still in the car. And all of a sudden, we're like, "Hey, what are you doing?" And he hears us, he jumps out of the car, he chucks a CD case at us, hits this guy in the head, and I'm kind of like an adrenaline junkie, so I'm like, and he starts running, so I start chasing after him. I'm like running down the road in the middle of stinking downtown LA. The Skid Row Hotel is right on the edge of Skid Row, so we're running into Skid Row. And if you do not know what Skid Row is like in LA, there's fires burning in the middle of the street. There's people in cardboard boxes. If you fall asleep in Skid Row, your shoes will get taken. It's a pretty scary place. There's people shooting up heroin all along the streets. And I am chasing this guy down into Skid Row. And we're running, and I'm a smack talker, so I'm like, "Dude, you can't get away from me!" And I'm running, and all of a sudden, just as I catch up to him and I jump on his back, this police car pulls around, doesn't know what's going on. The cops both open their doors, pull guns on both of us. Like, "Oh, it was him, it wasn't me, it's him." I've never had a gun pulled on me before, freaked me out, and so after people and almost killed them. And so one day I'm with another group, and we're walking to our vans to leave, and all of a sudden I see Leroy running at me. He's like, hey, and I'm like, I'll pretend like you didn't see him. And he's closer he gets, I notice something. Leroy, one of the scariest guys I've ever met, he's crying. He comes up to me, he's like, "Hey, I know you follow God and stuff, and I want you to pray for me." And I'm like, "What?" He said, "Yeah, see, in California, if you get arrested 3 times, you can go to, it's called the 3 strikes law. You can go to prison for anywhere from 5 years to life." And he had 2 felonies against him and had been in jail before. And then he told me, he's like, "Yeah, last night I was in a bar and I got pretty drunk and I beat a guy up pretty bad. And I heard the cops are after me. And I feel like if they're going to get me for this 3rd time, I can go to prison for the rest of my life." And at that point, I'm like, here's one of the scariest guys who could kill me, crying. Well, what do I do? "I'll pray for you." Okay. And so I just prayed for him. And you just never know what position God's going to put you in. But I wouldn't want to have it any other way. It's just amazing and exciting to be a Christian when you really start practicing what you say you believe. Do you guys ever hear that, this is back when it was kind of popular, the WWJD. You guys remember that? All you that are older. What would Jesus do? I always laughed at that because I always thought, Jesus did some pretty wacky things, if you think about it. One time, all the Pharisees started asking Jesus some pretty tough questions, and Gene alluded to this story before. He just bent down and just started drawing in the sand. You don't even know what he was drawing. He could have been making happy faces, I don't know. But he did some pretty wacky things. Jesus walked on water. I'd like to see you guys try that. What would Jesus do? I'm going to walk on water. You're going to sink. Jesus fed like thousands of people with a small little meal a little boy brought to him. We can't do that. Jesus did some pretty wacky things. You know the most wacky things that Jesus did? Somebody was blind. And Jesus could have just went, "Oh, you're healed." But what did he do? I don't know, maybe he had a lot of phlegm in his throat. He spit in the mud. Picked it up and put it in the guy's eyes. And the guy was healed. I would never even think to do that. It's like a holy loogie, And this is what Jesus did. And so, sometimes I don't know what to do. What would Jesus do in this situation? I don't know. I'll pray for you. Okay, But Jesus did some pretty wacky things if you think about it. because I think he was kind of a wacky guy, but that's who Jesus was. Now, one thing that Jesus did just totally blows me away. You may have read this in the Bible, and you may have just passed it over, but if you really think about it, Jesus wasn't afraid to get dirty. Jesus, there was a leper. Okay, this guy, if you don't know what leprosy is, it's a skin disease where your skin basically just peels off. Your muscles just cramp, and so your feet and your fingers shrink. And it's disgusting, and you could have pus and all this stuff coming off of you. And they were told that they had to go on the other side of the street and just to say out loud, I'm unclean, so people would avoid them so that nobody would touch them. They had leper colonies where these people would have to go and live away from normal people. There's this leper that comes up to Jesus and asks to be healed. Jesus could have went, oh, no, sorry, don't want to really touch you, and walk away. Or Jesus could have went, you're healed. But you know what the Bible says he did? He says he went up and he touched the guy and he healed him. He didn't have to touch him, but why do you think he did? That's right. Jesus was not afraid to get dirty. He wasn't afraid to touch people. He died for us all, but at the same time, he was so an individual person. He was so personal with people. So much of the fact that he touched, he spit, he did all these crazy things for people, and he was so involved in their lives. Physically, he was there. I look at some of these Bible stories of Jesus, and I'm like, how do I even apply this to my life? What would Jesus do in my situation, the things that I'm going through? The only thing I could think about that was we were in Mexico years ago, and we're in this orphanage, and one of the moms comes up to me and says, Brent, I don't know if you've noticed this, but the kids have lice. All the orphan kids, they have lice in their hair. What are we supposed to do? I said, love them, play with them, pretend like they don't have lice. If we get lice, big deal. Jesus would have played with the kids. Let's keep playing with them. These kids didn't have any way to, they didn't have the shampoo that we can buy at the stores around the corner that gets rid of lice or the combs or whatever. So, this mom would sit down every day with a comb and pretend like she's doing these girls' hair, but she's trying to pick lice out of their hair. And we just played with the kids and said, if we get lice, we get lice. Who cares? We love these kids, we love Jesus. And we did it, and none of us ended up getting lice, But we were there, and we loved the kids anyway. Don't be afraid to get dirty for Jesus. Don't be afraid of people that you think scare you. Because Jesus was the one that reached out to them, and so should we. There's a lot of stories that we look at and go, wow, how can Jesus do that? How do I apply that to my life? And if you look at the Bible as a whole, we may not know in every situation of how to apply that to our lives, but I can tell you one thing. I can tell you if you look at the Bible so closely, you will see who Jesus loves, who Jesus cares about, and it'll tell you what you should do about it. What is the number one, anybody know what the number one topic in the Old Testament is? It's the Bible school answer. God? Yes! The number one topic in the Old Testament is God. You know what the second biggest, the most talked about topic in the Old Testament is? Justice and serving the poor. Besides God, the Old Testament talks more about justice and serving the poor. You guys know that? This Bible is full of this. In the New Testament, justice and serving the poor is talked more about heaven and hell. Justice and serving the poor is talked more about Jesus coming back again. That's how much the Bible talks about service and justice for the poor. The Bible talks about poverty 2,100 times. In the New Testament alone, there's 500 verses. In the first 4 books of the Bible, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, it's 1 in every 12 verse that talks about the poor. In the Gospel of Luke, it's 1 in every 10 verse that talks about the poor. In the Gospel of James, it talks about every verse, 1 in every 7 verses talks about justice and serving the poor. You know what? This Bible is small already, but it would be a lot smaller if we took all the verses out that talked about the poor. You think God cares about the poor? He does. The question I have for all of you is, do you care about the poor? Do you care about the needy? Do you care about the people in this city that are going to sleep probably in this park or maybe on the benches where you're sitting right now? Do you guys care as much as God cares? That's what I want you to think about. Do you care that today 1.4 billion people live on less than $1.25 a day? 1 in 3 people in Africa are malnourished from lack of food. 65,000 people die every day from lack of drugs that you can get at the local pharmacy down the road. 65,000. 24,000 kids die every day from hunger. 24,000 children. Out of those 24,000, 8,000 of them are under the age of 5 years old. Every single day. 24,000 kids. That's 720,000 children a month, 8.6 million children a year. That's one child dies from hunger every 10 seconds. 1001, 1002, 1003, 1004, 1005, 1006, 1007, 2008, 2009, 10. Think how many 10 seconds you've been here tonight. It's a lot. That's a lot of kids that pass away just because they don't have food. Do you care about any of that, or is it just numbers to you? Do you care like God cares? Or maybe you care a little bit more about your cell phone. You might care a little bit more about your iPod. You might care a little bit more about making sure that you have name brand clothes that you wear and look cute every day. You might care about those things more than you care about people that are dying and with all the things that you take for granted every day. A full fridge, a bed to sleep in, a house. God cares. I love this story. A friend of mine that was working for Center for Student Missions in a different city told me this story that happened to him. This group came out from somewhere else to work in the inner city. Their van breaks down in the middle of the inner city. They're calling around trying to get rental cars and stuff, so they're in this parking lot of this gas station for a while. One of the kids that came on this trip really liked his shoes. You guys have anybody in your group, you know any people that just have to buy the nicest shoes? He bought the nicest shoes. There were these Nikes, they were totally white. Anytime he scuffed them or got a little mark on them, he had this little like shoe polish thing where you could just kind of go over it. Beautiful, beautiful shoes. I don't know how much they cost. I have no idea how much shoes are nowadays. I just buy Toms. But they're really, really nice shoes. And so he goes on this trip and he brings these shoes. And he's trying the whole trip, he's trying not to get them dirty. He's sitting in the van. They're just waiting for them to figure out what they're going to do with this broken down van. And the kids look and they could see a perfect view right down this dirty, scary, dark alley. And in this alley is a big dumpster. They see this homeless guy. He's got a pair of shoes that are falling apart. Got some holes in them. He walks up to this dumpster and he jumps in and he's looking around. All of a sudden he pulls out these pair of shoes that were pretty dirty, but at least they didn't have holes in them. So he says, hey, that's a trade up. So he takes his holy shoes off, he throws them in the dumpster, he puts these dirty shoes on that somebody had thrown away, walks away. Not very much long later, no joke, this guy comes up, he's got a piece of cardboard on his bottom of his shoe, wrapped around his foot with rubber bands. He's got them on both feet. This is his shoes. He's walking on cardboard held together with rubber bands. He goes to the dumpster. He looks in. He finds the shoes that are holy that the guy had just thrown away. Thinks to himself, well, this is a trade up. So he takes his rubber band shoes, cardboard shoes off, puts them in the dumpster, puts on the holy shoes, walks away. Not much long later, this guy walks up with no shoes. His feet are bloody. They're dirty, they're blistery. He's walking kind of gently because I'm sure his feet hurt. Guess what he finds in the dumpster? Cardboard, rubber bands. It's better than no shoes. Just as he's trying these cardboard rubber band shoes on, this kid with the white Nike shoes jumps out of the van, takes off his Nike shoes, hands it to the homeless guy, and says, God bless you, and walks away. That's pretty awesome. What would you give up? What's something that you hold tightly to that you couldn't live without? Could you give it up to somebody who has nothing? Sometimes God calls us to give up a lot, and sometimes we won't. One of the best ways to serve God is to serve the poor, because the poor have such a special place in the heart of God, I believe. You guys know the story about the sheep and the goats? Matthew 25, you got this incredible picture of the throne room of God, and God is there. It's like Judgment Day, and we're all there. And God looks down and he says, "Blessed are you, all of you people, because," and he uses the word "I." This is God talking. He says, "You know what? When I was hungry, you all, living on earth, you gave me something to eat. When I was thirsty, you gave me something to drink. When I was without clothes, you gave me clothes and you clothed me. When I was sick, you came and cared for me. When I was in prison, you came and visited me." And the Bible says when the righteous heard this, they looked up and they asked, "God, when were you hungry and we fed you? I don't remember ever giving you something to drink. When did we clothe you? When did we take care of you when you're sick? When did we visit you in prison? We did that for other people." And it says that God looks at them and said, "You know what? Yeah, you did it for other people. And when you did it for those people, it was just like you did it for me." You guys know when you feed people, when you give people drink, when you give your clothes away, when you care for the sick, when you visit people in prison, when you do those sorts of things, you know you're touching the very heart of God, according to that story. Isn't that cool? That's how precious the word is. The least of these are the people that really need it most. God holds close to his heart. Now, the first time that I went to downtown LA and started just feeding homeless people, it really rocked my world, because I didn't just feed people, but I talked to people. I heard their stories, and I went home. And I actually wrote a poem about my experience. So I'm going to read this to you guys. Is that cool? Can I do that? All right. It says, "As we dream of living on streets of gold, hundreds experience the streets of LA every day. I recognized Jesus sleeping in a cardboard box alone. I saw Jesus wearing the only clothes she owned. I noticed Jesus smiling in an innocent Hispanic kid. I hope he doesn't join a gang and die like his brother did. I was offered drugs by Jesus who said he'd get me high. I smelt the breath of Jesus as a wino staggered by. I gave my breakfast to Jesus, who hadn't eaten for days. This city holds opportunities to touch Jesus in many ways. I know Jesus sits in heaven upon his mighty throne, but we can reach out and touch him by helping those who have no home." That's the way I feel. From now on, I try to see Jesus in everyone that I try to help and serve. Now, one time I did this. There was a guy in a park, and we went to feed donuts to this guy in a park, and or a bunch of people in a park, and we were out there feeding donuts, and it looked like everybody gotten one. And I had one of these big, huge Bear Claw donuts, you know, those big old ones left. And I saw this guy all the way on the other side of the park, and so I'm like, "Oh, he hasn't had a donut yet." So I started walking over to him. And as I got closer, he saw me, he saw my donut, he got a big smile on his face. So I walk up to him like, "Hey, you hungry?" He's like, "Yeah." So I, "Here, have a big donut." He's like, "Thanks." Takes a big old bite out of it. And he's chewing on his bite, and I started talking to him like, "So, you know, tell me about yourself, what's your name?" And he's like, tells me his name, he was chewing, and then we had this conversation. We talked about where I was from, where he was from, what life was like. I shared my life with him, I shared God with him, and we had a great conversation. And after about 20 minutes, half hour, I looked down, and he had not taken one other bite of that donut. This guy was hungry. I could tell by the first bite. But he didn't take another bite of that donut. You know why? He was more hungry for somebody to talk to than food. He was lonely. He didn't have Jesus Christ in his life. He was sleeping under a tree somewhere. This guy was lonely. And that blew me away. And from that point on, I actually said, you know what, I want to do this much more often than I do it now. And that's when I started working for Center for Student Missions, started living in a Skid Row hotel at that point. There was a guy that lived in that hotel. It's called the Huntington Hotel down on 9th Street in Los Angeles. His name was Carl. Carl was a drug addict. He had needle marks all up and down his arm. And most of the time you talked to him, he was totally stoned, totally out of it, kind of responding to you with grunts. he would sit at the hotel lobby at night because he knew that we would come in with these youth groups and we'd have leftovers from meals that we'd come home with, and we'd give them our leftovers. We'd talk, we'd pray with them, we'd feed them, and then we'd go, then we'd go to bed or whatever. And we'd see him on the streets every once in a while. One day, Carl totally disappeared. Didn't know where he went. We all just assumed he was dead from an overdose. A couple weeks later, I'm in the Los Angeles mission, feeding people. I feel this tap on my shoulder. I turn around, and there's this guy with this big old smile on his face. He's like, "Brent, how you doing?" And I'm like, "Carl?" "Yeah." I'm like, "Oh my gosh." There was this glow in his eye. His hair was all slicked back. He was all smiling. I'm like, "Dude, what happened to you?" He's like, I finally took your guys' advice about getting into a mission. I heard you guys talk about God. I came here. They told me more about Jesus. I became a Christian. I'm off drugs. I'm getting my diploma. I'm loving Jesus, and it's just an amazing life. Thank you so much for spending all that time with me, even when I was completely stoned. Oh my gosh, Jesus can change lives, man. He can change lives. I was so excited to be a small part of Carl's transformation that, man, I'm thinking, Jesus can help me. He can help you guys save lives. How many of you guys have noticed all these balloons out here? There are 240 balloons. Why is that number significant? Because every day, like I said before, 24,000 children die every single day from hunger. So if you look at those balloons, 240 of them, every balloon actually equals 100. So that may seem like not a lot of balloons, but if you think about every one of those balloons equaling 100 balloons, it's a lot of balloons. And I want you guys to look over there and think about how many children die every single day from just not having enough food, not having enough to eat. And I want you guys to think, what can you do about it? Because I'm not just talking about kids in Africa. I'm talking about kids in the United States. I'm talking about kids in Ogden that go hungry every night. And so what these teenagers are going to do is they're going to cut the balloons and they're going to let them go. And I want you guys to watch and to think and to pray, how can God use me to save a life? How can God use me to change someone's life? Go ahead. Let those go, girls.
Sorry, I'm going to watch some balloons while I saw what you go.
And this is my challenge to you tonight. Where's all the thump people? My challenge to you, first of all, I'm very proud that you're giving up 6 days of your summer and paying to be here to serve others. That by itself is awesome. But I want to challenge you to do something even more. During Thump this week, I want you not just to serve people, I want you to talk to people. I want you to talk to the people you're serving. I want you to get in a conversation with homeless people and ask them about their lives. I want you to share your story, to share Jesus, and not be afraid to sit down with a homeless person that you fed and just talk to them. With children, with kids that you play with. Jump in and just go crazy. I want you to get personal. I want you to get dirty. I want you to get in. I just want you to get relational with people. Can you guys do that this week? For those of you that aren't going to Thump, this is my challenge to you. And I'm really serious about this. And I want you to think and pray about this. My challenge to you is any month of this summer, I want you to take an entire month this summer, once a week, for 4 weeks, I want you to find a place to volunteer. There are many places in Ogden that you can volunteer at. Food banks at the Catholic Community Service Food Bank in West Ogden. There's the Utah Food Bank in Salt Lake. Right down the street, there's Salvation Army down here. There's a million things that you can do with kids at the Marshall White Center, straight down Grant. There is so much that you can do for people and where you can volunteer. So this is my challenge to you. Any 4 weeks out of this summer, I want you to volunteer once a week somewhere. And it could be 4 different places, or it could be the same place. That's my challenge to you guys. And so, volunteer this summer at places. Those of you guys that go into Thump, get out of your comfort zone, go share your life and find out someone else's life, a homeless person this week. That's my challenge, you guys. The stand's gonna come up and play, or you guys are here. I want you guys to physically make a commitment that you're gonna do that. But only do that, come up here, only if you're serious about that. For you guys that are going to Thump, if you're serious about that, getting out of your comfort zone and doing a little more than you thought you would do. For those of you that aren't going to Thump, if you really want to say, I want to volunteer, I want to go to these places and work and serve people so I can serve Jesus, I want you to come up here too. Because I'm just going to pray for you guys. That's my challenge to you tonight.